Good afternoon and very warm welcome to the 6th Asia International Conference 2020. It is my privilege to introduce our honorable, brilliant and successful guest speaker, Dato Dr. Rajah Rasiah. Of course, the first question I was asked, how do I introduce someone who is known to everyone, as there are countless achievements to his credit, but I will try to describe few. Prof. Dr. Rajah Rasiah obtained his doctorate in economics from Cambridge University in 1992, and he was a Rajawali Fellow at Harvard University in 2014. He is a distinguished professor of economics at Asia Europe Institute, University of Malaya. He was the first holder of Khazanah National Chair of Regulatory Studies and served as a Dean of Faculty of Economics and Administration at the University of Malaya. He has been a professional fellow at UNO Merit since 2004. Also, he is a senior research associate at Technology Management and Development Center at Oxford University. He was a professional fellow at Center of Rising Power, Cambridge University, and also an advisory member of Institute Development Research Center, Zhejiang University. Prof. Rajah Rasiah is internationally famous for his lectures, policy talks, and keynote speeches in the world-renowned universities. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me welcoming Professor Dr. Dato Rajah Rasiah.
So please welcome our distinguished Professor Dr. Dato Rajah Rasiah.
Thank you. I have a name down there that's somewhat different from what I know of myself. My name there is Gajah Russia. That's how I look at it there. I mean, it should be Rajah Rasiah. Okay, no problem. Should I start the lecture now? I don't seem to get my screen share. Is someone going to display my screen up there, or I'll have to upload mine? I don't seem to know what's going on. I've been talking on the web for almost every day, but this is the first time I don't seem to know what's going on.
What happened, sir?
I don't seem to know how to. I don't see an icon here where I can upload my presentation. I only see present now. Is someone going to put it up there?
Yes, sir.
We can do it, sir. We can do it.
Okay, because I don't see that in this screen that you have provided me.
Okay, sir. You just present now. You just click the screen.
Click the screen.
Present now. Present now.
There is an option down below.
Yeah, I have presented. I have show entire screen, window, a tab. Which one should I press from there?
Down there, in the bottom, you have a present now. There is a
Sir, wait.
option.
I'm just doing for you. You just take. Sir, I'm doing for you.
Okay.
So you can see the slides.
I can see something appearing. Yeah, okay.
Okay. So
It's gone to the second screen right away.
okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this presentation actually deals with research and publication in the social sciences. So I believe there is significant weightage given to social sciences because it's somewhat different from how we view research. Especially so in areas that are defined as novelty. Because the sciences, scientific advancement is seen somewhat differently. And of course, the overall aspects of it is the same. And that also may explain why books are not seen as repositories that carry new knowledge in sciences, but they are in the social sciences. Because sometimes you need to tell a coherent story that requires a much longer range of words that require different sections, analyzing different sorts of phenomena that cannot be presented in just a few pages. I will come to that as we go. The next slide, please. The next slide, please. Okay. Submission of doctoral thesis in the social sciences have evolved significantly from the 1970s when few focused publications were generated by a limited number of gifted scholars. At that time, PhD thesis was not seen as central even to become an academic. There used to be even professors who only had a first degree, but it's no longer the case as such positions have become more competitive and governments have been concerned about the kind of salaries that they allocate from public funds. Ideally, publications is the culmination of research outcome, crystallized through intense refining. Important points when crafting theses and publications. I use the word thesis too here because in the social sciences, a good doctoral thesis that typifies the whole backbone of what constitutes a good thesis is it should be targeted at a book, university publications, because that's seen as the distinction. Today, a lot of social sciences have moved in the direction of pure sciences, and therefore most of us tend to just publish either journal articles or we are doing books that are actually edited books. They are not single author books. about particular communities or why particular communities do certain things. So that sort of work tends to get less citations. But it doesn't mean that those works are inferior simply because they have less citations. In fact, I think 70-something Nobel laureates came forward to say the fraternity of scholarship is heading in the wrong direction because somehow people are being promoted, people are being hired on the basis of citations. And yet they make the case that most of the works published tend to be based on incremental innovation or work that's related to what typically is published in those journals. So if you end up completely dismissing a body of literature, is that going on? Okay, the system has collapsed, it's gone back to slide 1. Can we get back to, okay. So in that sort of sense, what tends to happen is you see certain people, their citations are building like anything, and they think their performance is really based on how these citations go. Now I think the 77 Nobel laureates say that's actually giving a wrong direction for new scholars because most of the time they say the kind of work that got them the Nobel Prize has nothing to do with citations. In my field, for example, in the broader field of economics, the guys that have got Nobel Prize actually had few citations when they were nominated and they got their prize. Examples were Ronald Coase, Dato, Ostrom. These are all people who just had few hundred citations, ISI citations. But they now have around exceeding 100,000 citations only because they become very famous and they're seen as people who have actually extended the boundary of new knowledge. Now, I'm not sure. I mean, I always tell my students, please forget about the citations because a lot of them, even when referring, they expect their paper cited. I've seen that too. And even when I was chief editor of journals, I tend to encourage referees to do that. So I'm not telling you you don't do that. I mean, it's entirely up to you. But just you should not judge someone with fewer citations inferior to someone with superior citations, especially so when they're different range of journals. Some first-year journals that really deal with theory at the broad global level, as opposed to those who are just dealing with applying some part of the world. You have to make that sort of distinction. And in fact, most prizes recognizing scholarship don't actually look at citations. They look at how impactful their work has been, and that impact is not necessarily measured by citations. Now, the idea, in the interest of time, because we already lost quite a bit of time in trying to establish this webinar, I would try to quicken my presentation. But what is seminal? A lot of them think that because their work is cited a lot. In fact, some of my most cited works, I really don't think much of them. And I also don't know why they are cited more than some of the work that I think much more fondly of. Now, now what is seminal is if you redefine the tenets of theory, rather than just say, in this part of the world, this is the sort of findings that you have. That's not really, in the past, as I know, seen as exceptional to give you that logic of seminal, or providing better reasoning through more logical instruments. If you have a more robust method, then you say, well, this tends to give you that image. Even that is constrained by time. I mean, for a long time, Granger used to make the claim that you can only establish causality using a panel data sets. Now people are even questioning that. Refining or introducing better research designs, refining or new techniques for collecting data. And this is something very often good students tend to avoid because it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of risks, uncertainty to get to the real data that you're working on that is representative of populations. Now, I think in the long run, if you're going to be in research for the rest of your life, it's worth investing time doing that rather than taking a shortcut and just building from there. New techniques to analyze data is something very often being extended. Now, this is the point I'm trying to make. Contributions to plug existing research gaps, I think that's good. But unfortunately, most academic work, particularly those in the developing world, tend to be gravitating towards just using Western frameworks or combine adapted Western frameworks, and then looking at what sort of reactions you get from data collected from where you are in the developing world. And that's what I refer to as methodological dependency. There's no real serious attempt to question the methodology. If you look at the fundamentals of science, epistemology, it actually requests you as a scholar to question why you should be using it. You should justify all the time. Unfortunately, that sort of thing doesn't really happen very much. The school of epistemology, or the logic of scientific discovery, often proves to emphasize that. Next slide, please. Now, this is the sequence of research in the social sciences. You have to problematize your topic to justify that it's worth studying, worth analyzing, it's worth compiling as a thesis or compiling as a sequence of journal papers that produces novelty in terms of providing new knowledge to people who read it or in the same field. Once you problematize, you justify saying that it's definitely worthy, it has got scientific impact, advancement, it will have societal impact, and that such a research can be carried out. Then you extract questions. Questions typically come up with how, that sort of questions you have. Then those questions are supposed to guide you to the leading literature that deals with those questions, what the experts are saying who have done research in the past. Now, your task there is to unbundle that, is to critically evaluate that in your attempt to see if they are answering your questions. In the process, you're not just going to say, well, this guy is saying this guy found this is a sort of conclusion, this guy is arguing this way. Now, that's not really seen as sufficient. You should be able to question that. Are they robust in how they're presenting their findings? What sort of methodology have they used? The sample that you are those samples representative? But you have to question that way. It's only then if you think that there is sufficient rigor, then you don't have any research because they have answered your questions. Now, sometimes you might feel, even though they have rigor, you might feel that they haven't given you the direction for future research. Now, you might create that path to advance that further. In doing so, you are actually making a case for a new study, for a new article. That's how you should provide the motivation when you're writing a piece, to say why your paper should be accepted in a journal. Even though I must admit that I don't think journals themselves are all terribly honest too. And this is a point I raised when there was Jiri and there was these leading journal editors there, and they weren't saying no to what I said. Now, this sometimes tends to discourage, frustrate students. Now, sometimes you're lucky that you don't face that sort of problem. Sometimes you're unlucky, it might actually destroy your confidence. Now, you should then build yourself knowing that most journals focus on incremental innovation. They're not interested in you telling, well, these authors who happen to be in the editorial board, they're all talking nonsense. Then human beings by nature don't accept that. Now, you could take the path of some of the more bold guys who go around publishing in smaller journals, build their case up. That's the slow, patient route they've taken. And then subsequently, they end up coming back, making their journals more famous than the ones that were famous earlier. This has happened before. Unfortunately, that's the real world. Now, you can, of course, if you really believe in something that's in existing journals, and that's okay, proceed. Now, after which you need a research design if you're doing primary work. Remember that. Now, you could have a theoretical framework after your literature review, but it's not really absolutely necessary, a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework. But you need to have a research design or research framework if you're doing primary research. And then you need an analytic framework. How do you analyze the data in order to get the sort of implications that you will draw? Then, of course, you have to describe your sources and methods for collecting. Remember that a lot of data that's collected need to be questioned first before you enter and code, because sometimes people may not answer correctly. This is another problem I often see. Often people who tend to just read standard theory and haven't gone really to the firm or to the ground tend to just use those assumptions. And therefore, if they find suddenly in the scatter plot a few sets of data outside the normal plot, they remove them. They call them outliers and remove them. In reality, you have to justify why you're removing them, whether they indeed need to be removed. Because quite often they need not be in the area of being removed because they are actually correct information there. It's only when you feel that the justification is there for you to remove, you should remove them. And then the data cleaning, all this need to come into play. But if you're not collecting data, but if you're still drawing from stats department, sometimes stats department data can be faulty. You have to go back to them and ask. Only when you're sure about things, then you go to the next stage for analyzing data. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. Novelty in social science publications. Traditional past focus on Nobel and the World Academy of Science prizes. And this is what, at least since I've got the World Academy of Science prize, committee members told me that. So I'm giving you what they use as criteria for selecting awards. Attribution, whether you have attributed correctly, the respective guys, cumulative contribution, what part of contribution actually comes from you in the range of knowledge that is evolving, and the scientific value of what you're doing, what you've done, and the societal contribution. Now, I can tell you that some of the prizes that were won at a time when I was there was in. It's not the fact that the person who won it, she's from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, a Taiwanese would settle down there. She actually not only had published about 40 articles with several others in Nature, but her vaccine for treating asthma was the most widely used. So they actually stated that the fact that she had this vaccine that was most widely used to treat asthma, that's a societal contribution. So you have to think about that too. You cannot just say, well, I'm building my citations, I've got 500,000 citations, but you cannot draw anything from that to see how it has actually affected the lives of people. That doesn't constitute what they refer to as equivalent to getting a good prize. Of course, you might get prize about, high citation index, and therefore, the highly cited authors, you get a prize there. Or recently, Stanford put up a top 2% scientists with lots of citations. Everybody gets excited about it. Now, that's not something that can get you these prizes that I'm talking about. That requires societal impact. The troubling shift I find is academic mafia, collusive practices. The fact that they have sister journals and they tend to accept each other's papers because they think that self-citation is bad. And of course, they also tend to find ways to influence referees. Now, I think these are all conduct that should not be there. I'm only alerting if you're sincere enough, then you should be careful. Because there are people who have been caught and they've been shamed. There are those who haven't been caught. Well, they're lucky. But I think it's always good to follow the honest path. Excessive regulation by editors too exists, because sometimes editors will tell, well, we don't really publish papers of this kind because our readers don't quite like that. They prefer work of this kind. And then sometimes the editors themselves write that, well, can you please at least cite some of our works that shows that there's an interest? I'm not sure whether, I think these are all practices that are not good. Emphasis on citing sister journals and grand authors. They get excited, they build this caricature of grand authors, and then they expect that you need to have them. Problems of referee selection is always the case. Very often I find referees who actually should not be there. And therefore, if you click into my UM website, you'll find that I'm considered an excellent referee because I don't simply make a decision without a profound referee report. I often look at a paper to see what's good in the paper. I don't start with whether the paper should be rejected because people who don't know sometimes papers, they referee, but they referee most of the time towards rejecting so that they will not be made accountable once what they've done is done. Next slide, please. Differences between journals and books. Now, in the social science, books are still important unless you're just publishing a textbook. In Malaysia, for some reason, because we are obsessed with the Chinese model of ISI citations, books are not given much weight, but it's after the leadership went to see the leadership in the National University of Singapore, they found that in the social science, they do value research books, research monographs, just like the way they do at Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge. Of course, they also value journal articles, but you cannot just get away with writing journal articles without books, or you just do books without journal articles. You need to have both for a social scientist. Emphasis on scientific value is still important. Remember, a book is one, if you're dealing with a research monograph that requires much longer presentation for a coherent story about something you want to extend in the body of knowledge. But books, unless you're dealing with a university where you're publishing your PhD, books in forms like Routledge, Macmillan, I'm one of the editors of Springer Asia. They do see whether your book can sell because they don't want to lose money once your book is published. But of course, there are other predator publishers that just approach you. I know some of them, and they actually prey on students unsuspecting students that they end up publishing there. But the world above doesn't recognize such publishers. Edited books, it's not simple doing sometimes, although some people just piece together papers and then call it and publish somewhere. But if you are going to a good publisher, they will require thematic coherence, justification why such a book will be relevant. The chapters need to talk to each other too to have a coherent book. Journals' typical life cycle. Early phase, they will be begging papers from you. They will even tell you, well, you don't have to submit any fee. They process it in a week. They will tell you a whole range of things. Those guys are begging for papers at that stage. As a journal mature, then they tend to focus on quality and scope. But in the post phase, this is where some of these journals are now. Consolidation. If journals are good, they consolidate, but they also look for profits. And therefore, they say, well, you put in open access journal, you have to pay this much. And I want to openly say, I don't know whether they've improved. And many of us think it's in that sort of thing, it's technovation. When I was as a professor, we didn't think list of publication they should be in the list for that reason. Idiosyncratic choice seeking to, they tend to be predator. In fact, I remember a former lecturer of mine said he submitted a paper and he was rejected in half an hour. So probably the PhD student did it by just finding a justification to have high rejection rates. Now, I think if you are in an editorial body, you must act as a conduit, as a bridge for the new students. You shouldn't just simply make yourself difficult like some rash snobbish academics are. I mean, if an academic is really good, the tendency is the academic would not be snobbish, would be much more open. Several social science fields carry novelty in books owing to the need to have space to narrate their contributions. You cannot just tell them in a few pages. Stellar theses in social sciences are normally published in reputable press. In fact, when I did my PhD at Cambridge, for me that was important. So I ended up doing 5 analytical papers. Only then I felt it was possible for me to articulate myself to tell the whole story about what I was dealing with. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here in social science publications, I think. Yeah, okay. Tradition, notice we are going to third now. We are going backwards. Okay, this is choosing journals and book publishers. Reviewing scope of journals, presses, reviewing emphasis, word limit, type of methodology recommended, and target group. Sometimes, in fact, very often, people submit papers without looking at the scope, without looking at what the journal is dealing with. They submit the paper and they get it rejected quickly because the first reader sees, well, a whole lot of things doesn't match the journal. Now, once the student gets back the paper, instead of really refocusing, because you need to prepare your article, looking at the journal, and the literature review must find a connect to justify it will indeed contribute to the journal. Now, once they feel the journal is rejected for whatever reason, all they do is they cut and replace the one journal to another. They don't even reformat based on the format of the new journal. They don't even find a way to do literature review to find the connect. Now, these are not the right things to do. You're basically trying to kill yourself. These are things, simple things that you need to make sure that these things are done before you do any journal. Then seeking support from established scholars in the field. Sometimes it's helpful. You can just send to some established scholars, ask their opinions. Of course, some people will give you reply, some won't. It will be good. Even if established scholar is critical, it's giving it to you free. You shouldn't complain. Or even if it doesn't make sense, you can still ignore it. Open and blind referring. Very often we tend to feel that blind referring means that both sides don't know the work. Now, there is a huge asymmetry involved here. You have to think about it. Then in that way, reduce the possibility of identifying yourself when you're writing your paper. Because otherwise, the person who's reading it can always put it in the web and search. He would have seen that you would have either presented the paper somewhere or some way of connecting you. And then he will basically know, he or she will basically know who the author is, even though the author's name is removed. Now, I think you have to be careful with this because quite often referees tend to, and these are not honest referees, tend to be more careful when the author concerned is a big name and so on and so forth. Understanding biases of journals and books, you need to also do that by reading around, looking at the author, all that so that you tend to be on the wrong side of those biases. Checking publications record of journals presses, that too is important. Whether you feel certain journals are open enough to accept honest research, and whether journals are just there opening themselves for everybody and being very kind and polite, and yet they are not, they are basically just focusing on accepting papers from their own faculties or their own students. Quite a number of journals do that. They just reserve a lot of place for their own students and their faculty members. Fee-paying and non-fee-paying journals. Most social science journals welcome submissions without any charge. But there's a tendency now for open access journals, including some of the journals where our Dr. Imran Qureshi is publishing, they tend to request payments. Do we have another slide? Okay, let's check. Yeah, okay. Ethics in social science publications. Who qualifies to be an author? Now, this is a person I felt her presentation, since I saw her present this, something I had in mind, but because she had a eloquent presentation that day, I felt that she actually puts it across. A lot of journalists actually explain who qualifies as an author. Strictly speaking, those guys who plan and say, well, we'll do it jointly, and then some of them don't do anything, they cannot be there. And those who simply collect data, don't provide any analysis, they actually don't qualify. Those people who are just research assistants, who simply do the job of running around for you, they also don't qualify, but you can acknowledge all of them, you can. But today we tend to, just like myself, once people are connected to you, whatever they do, we end up putting their names. And sometimes it's also, there will be 5 authors, instead of producing 5 single authored articles, they all combine 5 times and they are get excited because they have 5 different, 5 papers, 5 authors, collect much more citations. Now, these are all actually not encouraged. These are all not encouraged, but I'm leaving it to you because I don't want to make decisions for you. In reality, they are actually not encouraged. Now, you need to acknowledge other contributors. Sometimes, in fact, this is a problem with some journals. I've seen even tier 1 journals, they claim to be tier 1, people defining what innovation means. When I then look at it, I find, well, I haven't seen anybody define innovation still better than Schumpeter. He defined it first in 1912. That book is in German, but I saw the English version. He was in Austria then. And then his 1934 book, he's defining that extended line of this thing. I haven't seen anything better than that definition he's got. I think something like on page 61. I do not think anybody has given anything better than that. And yet, I've seen journals on research policy and so on quoting others with inferior definitions of that. Now, I was taught in a very traditional way by my supervisors, my lecturers, to be honest. And therefore, I tend to go back and see who was superior earlier, rather than simply get to the... And journals tend to make this as a point. If you have in your article whole citation, they say, well, this is a journal looks like a dinosaur-based journal. And they're actually doing injustice to the body of scholarship. So much so that you have old wine in new bottles now. A whole lot of people talking about what others have done in the past, all because we have all these pseudo scholars in some parts of the world who want to build their own citations, forgetting those who have died, thinking that, well, they are no longer alive to come and trouble them. Now, honestly, I'll bring it to you. You make your decision, but I have not done that job of putting the new fellow. Very often I go back to the old fellow. Sometimes the journal even says, well, all these old guys, we don't think we want to appreciate this work. I don't care because I don't really need these fellows. Referencing and footnoting in the social science, you need to be careful with this. Because it varies with journals. It varies with journals. Authenticity of data, faking of data, sometimes people do that. In fact, the 50 statistics we use, I'm about to finish. Sorry, I know you're getting out of time. Faking of data, I think people use diagnostic, descriptive statistics to show that the distribution is normal to a whole range of things. But many people know how to work backwards. Now, this too is not really a good way of doing things. Now, you need to make sure that there's no plagiarism. You have to look at the rules of plagiarism. Sometimes you may have read and you have a photographic mind and you reproduce that unknowingly, but you could have a paragraph which actually constitutes plagiarism and can get you into trouble. You have to go and check those things too. I think we're done. Check the next slide, please. Oh, we have this. Well, this thing, since the time is already, from what Imran told me, I went into this. We may not have questions and answers. If you have questions on this, then I'll get to that. But you can always have these things with you. Thank you.
All right, Prof. Okay, thank you, Prof, for your thought-provoking views on such nice topic. And now our question-answer session is open. First of all, I want to ask one question. What is the difference between conceptual framework and research network?
The research network actually doesn't connect straight away to conceptual framework. Conceptual framework has a link with theoretical framework, except that if your work looking at extending the body of concepts, because lots of concepts are there, then it tends to lean towards concept, and therefore a conceptual framework will be more useful. Now, a theoretical framework you might require, if it again gives you a flow diagram, allows you to build a stylized structure coming from the review that you made, then yes. And it doesn't lean too much towards these concepts that sometimes can be controversial, contradictory, because some of them use certain concepts to mean certain things. Those are but you use one of them in a paper, not both of them. I notice some of them tend to use both. I don't know for what reason. Now, research networks, they are networks about, largely these networks don't necessarily connect with the literature review part of it. It connects much more with methodology. Now, in that sense, you could for example, there are those who work on systems of innovation. There are those who work on certain areas of public health. In that sense, they network accordingly on certain things. Now, they don't actually, again, constitute a major part of it, because the major part will be, if primary research is done, we say you need a research design or a research framework. Now, if you, then all methodological sections must have an analytic framework. They must have, regardless of whether they do primary research or whether they're relying on secondary data sets.
All right, thank you, sir. And our next question is from our participant, Nasiru Salu. She's asking that, Prof, please, I discovered an area for future research in 2007, elsewhere journal, and have not been addressed in 2020. To the best of my knowledge, can I venture in such research? If not, why? Thank you.
She's asking the prophet, please. No, I'm not sure.
Should I repeat the question, sir?
I'm sure she meant something else rather than prophet there.
All right. Can we
go
move
back
to the next question? Mr. Mashwike asking that, Professor, how to get paper explanation, how to formatting paper, as few things are really very difficult to understand according to journal's requirement.
Now, formatting papers would not be difficult because you would look at a journal, they would explain, except that most students, most paper writers don't seem to enjoy reading the rules and regulations. Typically, they have either in the back cover, just before the back flap, inside of the back cover, or they have it the inside of the front cover in small letters. Now, even if that doesn't make it clear for you, just look at the papers published in those journals. Say, for example, the way you reference in the text and the way you reference at the back. For example, how do you then format your figures, your tables? All that are explained there. And if the explanations are not clear for you, go and look at the published versions of papers. If one is not clear, go and look at the second one. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next question is from Ki Lili. She's asking that, Prof, there is a possibility to publish in periodically paid journals it is tend to be of faster process. What is your advice for us as PhD scholars?
Let me make it clear for you that open access journals sometimes are honest when they say they have decided to go open access because they want the publications to reach everyone, from the poor to those where the even the poor in big universities. If the journal is good, the journal will subscribe. Now, if the journal is talking about publishing and you pay because they have a high turnover rate, and most of the time these kind of journals become predatory. In the short run, sometimes students, out of lack of choice, they end up doing it. But in the long run, you should try to avoid them. You should build relationships such that you know which journals to publish in, because journals themselves are also, in that sense, they can be parochial. They have their own relationships. They favor some over others with very little link to whether the scholarship there is worthy of publishing. Now, you will gradually move, and that's the sort of direction you must take. And then realize, well, I'd rather go into this sort of journal because they make more sense. And the referees that give me comments too, they're constructive compared to these journals where they are highly destructive. Sometimes they're destructive simply because the journal doesn't know how to choose referees. And let me give you an example. I remember this. In 1992, the Scandinavian Journal of Economics interviewed some researchers. Paul Krugman was one of them. And then the first question, excuse me, Professor Krugman. Now, have your articles ever been rejected? First one. And of course, his answer there, yes, I have a paper that I did rejected by a journal called American Economic Review. And he said he also rejected by a few other journals. I can't remember exactly which journal, but he mentioned a few other big journals. Then he said the reason why they rejected, he said, he thought is because the referees didn't understand his paper. He didn't say they were biased and so on. He said the referees didn't understand his paper. He subsequently published that paper in Economic Geography. That's the one that built his reputation for new geography and got him the Nobel Prize. So you don't have to, in the end, of course, he was already a big name by then. He's already published quite a bit, not just by himself, but with Gene Grossman, with Alhan and Hauptmann and others about the new trade theory. Now, maybe you might not do it because you're not in his league, but you may want to have Grossman and Elhanan it's Elhanan Helpman, not Hoffman. Well, I leave it there. Helpman. Now he's at Harvard. Now, Harvard is a Harvard. This is a university by itself, Harvard, where Kamala Harris studied. Harward, because the spelling you put, the spelling you're putting there leaves it as a different university. Okay, now I just wanted to mention that you shouldn't be overly concerned about that. If you continue to have problems, talk to people who publish. And among the great guys you have there is Dr. Imran Qureshi. He's always there to help. Even if I'm not there to help, just find someone to talk to and set yourself up somewhere. Other than sometimes, you continue to get negative replies from journals, and it might actually undermine your confidence.
Okay. Thank you, Professor, for your valuable suggestions and your thought-provoking views. We are highly thankful for you today for such a nice workshop. Hope we will continue for the next workshop, inshallah. So thank you so much for today's session.
You're welcome. Thanks very much. Bye.
Okay, thank you very much, all the participants who join us in this valuable session. Thank you very much. We will continue our pre-conference workshops, and we will see you there. Thank you very much.